They pulled Mara Knox into the spotlight to impress politicians, but what they unleashed was something far more dangerous than a demonstration. She is the sniper they hide until failure is no longer an option, the one called when hostages are running out of time and every other plan ends in body bags. This story is not just about impossible distance, it is about a woman forced out of the shadows because reality keeps demanding the impossible.
As a general, he believed he had seen everything. He knew about war, honor, courage, and deceit, but this was a number he had never encountered. 3,200 meters. A successful shot. He stood completely still. A sudden silence fell over the armory. Every officer noticed the change in the air. This inspection was no longer routine. It was something else entirely. A shot from that range was not in any official record. It was not supposed to be achievable with a standard rifle. Yet, the proof was right there, on a soldier who had always been invisible. If you want to hear how this impossible feat was real, you need to hear the rest of this story. Like this video and comment with your city so I can see how far this story goes. The air inside the main armory at Ironcliff Base smelled of gun oil and cold steel. It was 6 o'clock in the morning, and the humming fluorescent lights threw a sterile, white glare over everything. This intense light made every shadow seem stark and unnatural. Racks of weapons lined the walls in perfect order. There were M4 rifles, M240 machine guns, grenade launchers, and heavy sniper rifles secured behind reinforced glass. Each weapon was in its designated spot. Each one served a distinct purpose, and all were prepared for the general's review. General Richard Hale walked like a man who was very hard to impress. He wore 4 stars on his shoulder and had 32 years of service behind him. He had seen combat in Kandahar, Ramani, Seoul, and many other places that are not on any public map. The general had an instinct for reading people. He could recognize commitment, and he could see laziness. Most of all, he knew when a person was hiding something. His aide, Captain Morris, walked right behind him, carrying a tablet and checking off a list with mechanical efficiency. Morris was a competent but ordinary young officer. He was the kind of person who kept the machine running without ever wondering why it was built. "The inventory is flawless, sir," Morris said quietly. "There are no changes from last month." General Hale did not answer. His gaze was already moving down the rows of military hardware. He examined it all with the eyes of a man trained to find the one tiny mistake in a flawless system. He was searching for a single detail that was not quite right. The soldiers stood motionless at their stations. Many of them were expert armorers who knew the weapons better than the soldiers who fired them. They stared forward, with their shoulders squared and their breathing controlled, exactly as they had been taught. Hale passed the first line of soldiers, and then the second, without a word. The sharp sound of his boots echoed on the concrete floor, each step heavy and deliberate. That was the moment he saw her. She was in the far corner, near the section for heavy weapons. She was kneeling beside a large, disassembled rifle. It was a Barrett M82A1, a .50 caliber firearm that weighed 30 pounds and could disable a vehicle from a mile away. It was a weapon that terrified enemies and left a mark on the soldiers who used it. She worked with a calm and methodical rhythm. Her hands moved with a self-assurance that could only be earned through countless hours of repetition. The bolt carrier, the barrel, and the recoil mechanism. Each piece was laid out on a clean mat in perfect order. She made no unnecessary movements and showed no hesitation. At first, Hale paid her little attention. He assumed she was another technician doing her job. Nothing appeared out of the ordinary. He kept walking, but something small pulled at his focus. It felt like a brief motion at the edge of your vision. It was like hearing a sound that does not belong. He stopped and slowly turned back. The soldier was still kneeling, now tightening a component on the rifle with a special tool. Her expression was serene and focused. She wore a standard-issue uniform, and her hair was tied in a neat bun. She had no makeup on and wore no jewelry. She was following every regulation and appeared completely normal, except for one detail. It was the patch. It was a small, plain patch, attached just below her unit symbol. Most people would have overlooked it, and even if they saw it, they would not have known what it signified. But the general noticed it. He stepped closer, his gaze locked on the patch. It was solid black with a single line of white text. The text read, 3,200 meters, confirmed. For 3 whole seconds, General Hale forgot to breathe. He read the inscription again, and then a third time. He hoped the words would somehow change into something that made sense. 3,200 meters. That was almost 2 full miles. The longest recorded shot in military history was 3,540 meters. That shot was made by a Canadian Special Operations soldier. That event took place in 2017 in Iraq. It involved a team of spotters, perfect weather, and a shot that military experts still debate. Many believe it was a mix of incredible skill and pure luck. And here was this soldier, a staff sergeant, wearing a patch for a shot just 340 meters shy of that amazing record. General Hale's jaw tightened. Soldier. His voice was sharp and loud. The woman looked up. Her eyes were a steady, calm gray. She did not seem surprised. She did not even get up. She simply met his gaze with a quiet intensity. "Sir," she answered. Her voice was steady and showed no sign of fear. General Hale pointed at the patch. "I want to know about that." She glanced at her own sleeve and then looked back at him. "It is for marksmanship, sir. It signifies a confirmed shot over a long distance." "I know what that is," Hale said, his voice low and sharp. "My question is why you have it." The room fell deathly quiet. Every technician and officer stared at them. Morris stood frozen, his pen hovering over the tablet screen. The woman set her wrench down softly on the mat. "I earned it, sir." Hale felt his heart hammer in his chest, not with anger, but with complete shock. That shot is not in any training manual. It is not an official procedure. It is nearly impossible. "With all due respect, sir," she replied, her voice steady, "it is on the record." "Whose record?" "Mine." A heavy silence filled the air. Hale stared at her, and she met his gaze without flinching. She was not being defiant or proud. She was simply stating a fact. Morris cleared his throat. "Sir, should I pull up her file?" Hale answered, his eyes still locked on the soldier. "Right now." Morris's fingers flew across the tablet. A second later, all the color drained from his face. "Sir, it is restricted." Hale whipped his head around. "What do you mean?" "Her service record. I can see the basics, but the rest is blacked out. I need a much higher security clearance to view the details." Hale's eyes narrowed into slits. He turned back to the soldier. "What is your name?" "Staff Sergeant Mara Knox, sir." "How long have you been stationed here at Ironcliff?" 8 months, sir." "And where were you before this?" A small silence hung in the air, just long enough to feel important. "I was on deployment, sir." "The details are classified." Hale felt the entire mood of the room shift. It was a subtle shift, like the air becoming still right before a powerful storm. He moved a step closer to her and lowered his voice. "I have been in this uniform for more years than you have been alive. I have reviewed the classified files of elite operators and secret assets that most colonels will never see, and not one of them ever had a patch like the one you are wearing." Mara did not so much as blink. "Then maybe you have not seen all the right files, sir." The tension in the room was so thick you could feel it. Morris let out a small noise that was somewhere between a cough and a gasp. Another soldier shifted his weight, and the sound of his boots scraping the floor was incredibly loud. General Hale held her gaze for 5 long seconds. Then he straightened up, turned around, and marched toward the exit. "Morris, I want to see you in the conference room in 10 minutes." "Yes, sir." As General Hale stepped out of the armory, the harsh morning sunlight felt like an assault. He stood on the steps, breathing in the cold air deeply. He tried to push away the unsettling feeling that was growing inside him. Impossible. That was the only word that fit the situation. The patch was simply impossible. But Staff Sergeant Mara Knox did not look like a person who was telling a lie. She looked like someone stating a simple truth, and that was much more unsettling. 10 minutes later, General Hale sat alone in the conference room. He was looking at a tablet that was failing to provide any of the answers he needed. Morris had pulled together every piece of available data on Staff Sergeant Mara Knox. There was not much to see. Name: Knox, Mara J. Rank: E6, Staff Sergeant. Military Occupational Specialty: 11 Bravo, Infantry. Additional Skill Identifier: B4, Sniper. Her current assignment was listed as Armory Operations at Ironcliff Base. Her previous assignments were blacked out. Her past deployments were blacked out. Her list of awards was blacked out. The only information that was not hidden was basic. She was 29 years old. She was from Billings, Montana. She had enlisted in the Army 11 years ago. Everything else, every important detail, was concealed behind levels of security that General Hale himself could not get past. None of it made any sense. He was a 4-star general. Very few individuals in the entire military structure had more authority, but he was staring at a file that was treating him like an outsider. Morris stood near the door, looking extremely anxious. "Sir, I have submitted a formal request for access, but it is going to take a while." "How long is a while?" "It could be a few hours, or it might be a few days. It really just depends on who needs to sign off on it." Hale pushed the tablet across the table. "Tell me what you make of this." Morris took a moment to study the sparse details. She enlisted at 18. Graduated top of her class in basic training at Fort Benning. Then she was selected for advanced infantry school. After that, the trail goes cold. A 6-month window lists her status as in training, but there is no location, no details. It might have been sniper school, but not a standard one. Whatever it was not the normal Fort Benning program. Hale settled back in his chair. "What about her performance on the shooting range?" Morris tapped the screen. "That is one of the strangest things." "Explain strange." "Her rifle qualification scores are all listed as exempt." "Exempt?" "Yes, sir. It does not say she passed or failed, just that she was exempt. It is like the test was never required for her." Hale felt his jaw tighten. "Go on." "After that training gap, she shows up in a unit I have never heard of. Task Force Mongoose. There is no home base, no command structure. All it lists is the name. Mongoose," Hale said softly. He remembered hearing that name years ago. It was in a briefing about special operations in the Hindu Kush Mountains. They talked about secret teams for missions too sensitive for the regular forces. He had assumed it was just a story. Morris continued. "She was with that unit for 4 years, then she was transferred here. No explanation was given, no transfer notes. She was simply assigned to the armory like she came from a boring desk job." Hale stood and walked to the window. Outside, the base was waking up. Soldiers ran in formation, and trucks drove to the motor pool. It all looked perfectly normal, but there was nothing normal about Mara Knox. "I want the range logs," Hale commanded. He needed to see every record she had, from live fire drills to basic practice. Morris quickly left the room. Hale stood at the window, watching the sun climb higher. He thought about the look in Mara's eyes. It was not fear, and it was not pride. It was pure, unshakable confidence. She looked like a person with nothing left to prove. It was puzzling. By 400 hours, Hale had the files. The logs were almost blank. Mara Knox rarely used the training ranges. On the few times she did, her targets were placed at unbelievable distances. 800 meters, 1,000, even 1,200, and every shot was recorded as a perfect hit, not just hitting the target, but a bullseye in the dead center every time. Hale sat in his office, feeling the weight of the information settle on him. A knock came at the door. Enter. Morris walked in, followed by an officer Hale did not recognize. The man was older, with a calm presence, as if he had been pulled out of retirement. "Sir," Morris said, "this is Colonel Greer from JSOC. He requested a meeting." Hale got to his feet. "Colonel," Greer gave a small nod. "General, I was told you were looking into one of my former operators." Hale's attention snapped into focus. "Your operator?" Greer explained. "She is currently posted at Ironcliff, with an official assignment in armory support. Unofficially, she is waiting on standby." "Standby for what?" Greer gave a faint smile. "For missions that need someone who can do the impossible." Hale crossed his arms. "That badge she wears, for the 3,200-meter shot, is it real?" Greer's smile disappeared. "It is real. How is that possible?" "That information is classified," Greer said carefully. "But let me tell you this. Mara Knox is the most precise long-range shooter I have ever seen. She might be the best in the world. And if you are thinking of using her for a publicity event, I would strongly advise you not to. And why is that? Because she does not perform for a crowd. She performs when lives are on the line. If you put her on a stage, you will lose a special asset who succeeds because no one is watching her." The weight of those words hit Hale hard. "She is being wasted working in an armory." "Is she?" Greer tilted his head. "Or is she exactly where she ought to be until we need her again?" The room fell silent. Greer walked to the door, then paused. "One more thing, General. The shot that earned her that badge was not a practice drill. It was a live operation. A high-value target, hostages, no air cover, and no backup. It was just her rifle, and 4 hours to calculate a shot that should have been impossible." Hale held his breath. One shot, one kill. 32 hostages walked away unharmed. Greer left. Hale stared at the empty doorway, a new feeling rising in his chest. It was not doubt or disbelief. It was a deep understanding. That evening, Hale returned to the armory. It was much quieter, with most of the technicians gone for the day. A few people remained, finishing up reports and securing weapons. Mara was still there. She was in the same spot, with the same rifle, working with quiet intensity. Hale approached her slowly, his hands held behind his back. She looked up when he was about 10 feet away. "General Knox." He paused beside her workstation. "I spoke with Colonel Greer." She just gave a single nod, her expression unreadable. "He told me about that shot." She nodded again. "Why did you not say anything?" Hale asked. "When I questioned you, you could have set the record straight. You could have defended your honor." Mara set down her cleaning rod. "Respectfully, sir, there was no need. The badge is real. The record is real. Whether you chose to believe it or not does not change reality." Hale felt a wave of respect mixed with a touch of frustration. "Most soldiers would have jumped at the chance to show off their skills," he said. "I am not most soldiers." "No," Hale said quietly. "You are definitely not." He watched her work for a moment. Her rifle gleamed under the overhead lights. Every part was spotless, every piece checked twice. "How do you even make a shot like that?" he finally asked. 2 miles, factoring in wind, bullet drop, and the rotation of the earth. How do you possibly account for all of it? Mara looked up at him. For the first time, he saw a slight shift in her expression. It was not a smile, but it was a look of complete sincerity. "You do not rush," she explained. "You do not guess. You do the math, and you wait. And when that perfect moment comes, you have to trust the work you have already put in." Hale nodded slowly. "And what if you miss? Then someone dies who was not supposed to." The gravity of her words hung in the air between them. Hale turned to go, but then he stopped. Knox. Sir? You should not let them hide you in this armory. You are meant for more than this. She tilted her head slightly. With all due respect, sir, I am exactly where I need to be. Hale studied her for another second. Then he walked away. As the door closed, Mara went back to her rifle. She was focused, precise, and unseen, which was just the way she liked it. About 3 days later, an official order came through, and it felt all wrong. Hale read it twice before he called Morris into his office. Sir, they are ordering Knox to perform a live demonstration, Hale said, his voice tight with anger. Some tour group of VIPs wants to see our best sharpshooter in action. They want her on the range tomorrow morning at 900 hours. Morris looked troubled. That is extremely unusual. It is idiotic, Hale corrected him. She is not some kind of circus act. Should I file an objection, sir? Hale considered it, then shook his head. No, we will let it happen. Morris seemed surprised. Sir, if they want a demonstration of her skill, then we will give them one. Maybe then they will understand why we do not put her on display like a trophy. Morris left, looking more confused than ever. Hale leaned back and stared at the ceiling. He had a strong feeling that the next day was going to be memorable. The following morning, the Iron Cliff long-distance range stretched for 3 miles into the desert. Small flags marked every 100 meters. Mounds of dirt rose and fell like waves. At the far end, almost invisible to the naked eye, were steel targets shaped like human silhouettes. The group of VIPs arrived at 8:45. It was a mix of congressmen, weapons manufacturers, and a few reporters with cameras. They gathered on the viewing platform, talking among themselves and sipping coffee. Hale stood off to the side with his arms crossed, taking it all in. Mara arrived at 8:55, carrying her rifle case. She wore her standard uniform, with her hair pulled back and a neutral look on her face. She paid no attention to the crowd. She set the case down, opened it, and began to assemble her rifle. She moved with that same calm purpose Hale had seen back in the armory. A congressman wandered over to Hale. Is that her? Yes. She does not look like much. Hale offered no reply. The range officer, a master sergeant with 30 years of experience, stepped forward. Sergeant Knox, you are cleared for this demonstration. Your targets are at 800, 1,000, and 1,200 meters. The wind is 3 knots out of the northwest. Air pressure is holding steady. The range is all yours. Mara simply nodded. Understood. She moved to the shooting platform, settled into a prone position, and peered through her scope. The rifle looked enormous next to her small frame, but she handled it like it was a part of her. Hale watched her breathing slow down. He saw a profound stillness settle over her whole body. Several long minutes passed. The VIPs started to get restless. One of them whispered to another, who then glanced at his watch. Suddenly, a powerful boom rolled across the valley. The rifle's recoil kicked up a small storm of dust. Mara absorbed the force without shifting an inch. Stand by, the range officer announced, looking through his spotting scope. 3 seconds. We have impact at 800 meters. Center mass. The VIPs offered a round of polite applause. A defense contractor nodded with an approving look. Hale's expression did not change. Mara worked the bolt, chambered a new round, and settled back into position. Another minute went by in complete silence. Boom. Impact. 1,000 meters. Dead center. This time, the applause was louder, with a few comments of respect. Mara ignored it all. She was already adjusting her scope, running new numbers in her head, and breathing in sync with the wind. She took her time with this shot. 5 minutes went by. The special guests started shifting in their seats. A reporter whispered something to his cameraman. General Hale's jaw tightened. He thought to himself, just you wait. Boom. The sound of this shot was different, deeper and more powerful. The valley itself seemed to swallow the noise. Everyone leaned forward to get a better look. The range officer lifted his binoculars and frowned. He fiddled with the focus. Then, his voice came out flat, full of disbelief. "We have an impact. 1,200 meters. It is dead center, within 2 inches of the kill zone." The crowd was completely silent. Then, a single person started to clap. Soon, others joined him. A little hesitant at first, then with real enthusiasm. Mara stood, ejected the spent shell, and started to disassemble her rifle. One of the congressmen approached General Hale. "That was incredible, General. Truly. But I was hoping to see something closer to her record. The 3,200-meter shot." Hale gave him a cold look. "You just did." "I am sorry. What do you mean?" "She fired at 1,200 meters because that is how long this range is. But the accuracy, the consistency, the patience, and the control are the same no matter the distance. If you want to see 3,200 meters, then build me a longer range and give her a target worth the effort." The congressman was left without words. "I see." Hale turned and walked away, leaving the important guests standing there. He found Mara near the equipment shed, carefully storing her rifle case. "Knox?" She glanced up. "Sir, how did you feel about that whole display?" "About what, sir?" "Being put on a show like that." She simply shrugged. "Sometimes it is just part of the job. It should not be." Mara looked him directly in the eye. "With all due respect, sir, I did not mind. They needed to learn what real discipline looks like, and now they have." Hale studied her for a long moment. Then, he gave a slight nod. "You are dismissed." She turned and walked toward the motor pool with her rifle case slung over her shoulder. She moved with that same quiet concentration that defined her. Hale watched her go, and for the first time in a very long time, he felt a little bit of hope. The world was full of loud people demanding to be seen, but she was not one of them. That was simply not Mara Knox's style. All she ever really needed was her rifle, a clear target, and a good reason. When the time came to do the impossible, she would be ready, silent and invisible until the very last second. That night, General Hale sat in his quarters and reviewed the reports from the demonstration. The special guests were deeply impressed. The military contractors were already asking for more performance data. The reporters were busy writing stories about the ghost sniper who came out of nowhere. He set the file aside and stared at the wall. Somewhere on that base, Mara Knox was probably cleaning her rifle again, just like she did every single night. It was a slow, careful, and perfect ritual. And she would do it all over again tomorrow. And she would do it the day after that, and the day after that, until she got the call. Hale leaned back in his chair, his eyes drifting toward the window. The lights of the base held back the darkness of the night. And out in that darkness, a soldier nobody ever saw was guarding the line. Some heroes do not need trophies to change the world. They just need to be ready when the world needs them. Her call came 3 weeks later, and it did not come through the usual channels. Hale was in his office going over supply requests when the secure phone started to ring. It was not the one on his desk, but the black one. That phone only rang when a mission had gone completely wrong and required his direct command. He picked it up before the third ring. "Hale." The voice on the other end was clipped, professional, and unfamiliar. "General, this is Major Vance with Joint Special Operations. We have a situation that needs your immediate attention. Can you confirm that your line is secure?" Hale glanced at his office door, which was closed and locked. "It is confirmed. What is the situation?" "We need Staff Sergeant Knox. Immediately." Hale felt his heart start to beat a little faster. "Explain." "There is a hostage crisis happening right now. It involves embassy personnel and other high-value individuals. Our window for a tactical solution is closing fast. We need her unique skill set on site within 6 hours." "Where?" That information is classified until she has been briefed. Can you authorize her deployment? Hale's jaw clenched tightly. She's not just some asset I can deploy at a moment's notice. She is currently assigned to the armory. General. Vance's tone became even colder. We both know that is just a cover assignment. Colonel Greer's report indicated she was on standby for immediate recall. We are using that option now. Hale stood and walked over to the window. Outside, the base carried on with its normal daily life. Soldiers were doing physical training, mechanics were fixing vehicles, the whole machine was running as usual. What is the threat? Armed militants in a fortified position, with civilians in immediate danger. A standard assault would lead to too many casualties. We need precision. We need distance. We need knocks. Hale closed his eyes for a moment. She is not a piece of gear you can just pull off a shelf when you need it. No, sir. She is a specialist. We call her when lives are on the line. And right now, 12 lives are on the line. So I will ask you again, can you deploy her? A long, tense silence hung in the air between them. Finally, Hale spoke in a low voice. I will send her to your location. But Vance, sir, if you do not bring her home safely, you will have to answer to me. I understand, General. The line went dead. Hale stood there for a second, looking at the phone, feeling the weight of his decision. He then grabbed his hat and headed for the door. He found Mara exactly where he expected to find her, in the armory, cleaning her rifle. She looked up when he entered, reading his expression in an instant, her hands never pausing their work. Sir? Get your gear ready, Hale said. You are leaving in 90 minutes. Mara did not ask any questions or show a hint of surprise. She just gave a sharp nod and began packing her weapon with quick, practiced movements. The mission duration is unknown. It could be a few hours or a few days. You will be briefed on the rules of engagement during transport. She stood up, slung her rifle case over one shoulder, and picked up her gear bag with her other hand. Her face was a mask of calm, but Hale saw something in her eyes. It was not fear, and it was not excitement. It was pure focus, the kind of focus that only appears when the stakes are incredibly high and there is no room for error. Knocks. She stopped at the door and looked back. Hale wanted to say something more, to tell her to be careful, to come back in one piece, to remind her that she was more than just her talent, but the words would not come. Mara Knox did not need comforting. She needed his trust. Make it count, was all he managed to say. She met his gaze for a second, and then she was gone. Hale stood alone in the armory, listening as her footsteps faded down the hall until only a deep silence remained. The briefing happened on a C-130 transport plane, flying high over the Atlantic Ocean. Mara was in the cargo bay with tactical maps, satellite images, and 3 officers who looked like they had not slept in days. Major Vance, a thin man in his mid-40s with intense eyes, led the meeting. With him were Captain Reyes, a logistics expert holding a tablet with live updates, and Lieutenant Samuels, a young forward observer who stared at Mara like she was a living legend. Vance wasted no time. 12 hours ago, the United States Embassy in Kazan was overrun by a militant group calling themselves the Red Crescent Brigade. They are holding 16 hostages. That includes our ambassador, 2 Central Intelligence Agency officers, and 11 local staff members. He tapped the tablet, and a map of the embassy appeared on a screen in the cargo bay. The building sat on a hill overlooking the city, surrounded by high walls, guard towers, and a single road that snaked up from the valley below. The militants are dug in deep, Vance continued. They have blocked the main gate, mined the road, and put their own snipers in the towers. Any kind of direct assault would be a bloodbath for them and for us. Mara studied the map, her eyes tracing the angles, the sight lines, and the blind spots. What are their demands? The release of 30 prisoners from government custody. Their deadline is in 36 hours. After that, they will start executing the hostages, 1 every hour. Samuels shifted uncomfortably in his seat. We have tried to negotiate. They refuse to talk. Mara's gaze never left the screen. Air support is not an option, Vance said. There is too much risk of collateral damage. The hostages are spread throughout the building. One wrong move, and we could lose them all. A ground assault is just as risky. It would be a suicide mission just to get to the front gate. Mara leaned in, looking closely at the terrain. So, you need someone to take out their leader without starting an all-out war. Exactly. Vance looked straight at her. We have identified their commander. His name is Tariq al-Hazam. He is a former soldier, and he is both smart and ruthless. The entire operation is being directed from a secure conference room on the embassy's third floor. If we take him out, their whole command structure will crumble. His deputies will fall into confusion, and our quick reaction force can move in during the chaos. Reyes brought up a new image showing the building's layout. It is located on the third floor's northeast corner, with windows overlooking the valley. Mara's gaze scanned the distance from the embassy to the hills. The range. Vance's face became grim. Roughly 2,800 meters. The only noise in the cargo hold was the engine's constant drone. Samuels was the first to break the silence. That is almost 2 miles. Mara's expression remained unchanged. She was busy studying the terrain, mentally calculating wind, elevation, and heat distortion. What does the weather look like? Reyes glanced at his device. The winds are unpredictable, gusting to 15 knots. Temperatures will drop after sunset. The humidity is climbing. When do I take the shot? That is your call, Vance answered. But time is not on our side. The longer we wait, the more perilous this becomes for everyone. Mara sat back, her eyes fixed on the map. Her mind was already weaving together all the variables. The bullet's trajectory, the atmospheric conditions, the human factor, a 2,800-meter shot with gusting winds and urban heat, all while hostage lives were at stake. This was a shot that most marksmen would not even dream of attempting. She glanced at Vance. I will need a spotter, someone who knows this area well. Samuels is assigned as your forward observer. He has been stationed in that zone for the last 6 months. Mara sized up the lieutenant. He looked incredibly young, but his eyes were steady, and he met her stare directly. That was a promising sign. What are the rules of engagement? She inquired. You need a positive identification of Al-Hazam. Make sure he is alone. You have 1 shot, a clean hit. There is absolutely no room for error. Mara gave a slow, deliberate nod. And what if I miss? Vance's face was like granite. Then 16 innocent people will die, and we will be bringing home caskets instead of survivors. The weight of his statement hung heavy in the air. Mara rose, slinging her rifle case over her shoulder. When do we get on the ground? Your touchdown is in 4 hours. You will have until dawn to establish your position. First light will be your best chance. She began moving toward the rear of the aircraft, then stopped. Major, he answered. Yes. If this mission goes wrong, I need you to make sure they know we gave it everything we had. The hardness in Vance's face softened just a little. It will not go wrong, Sergeant. That is precisely why you are the one here. Mara offered no further words. She simply walked to the back of the plane, took her seat, and closed her eyes. Samuels watched her for a moment, then spoke quietly to Reyes. Is she always this calm? Reyes replied without looking up from his tablet. She is not calm, Lieutenant. She is focused. In her mind, the shot has already been taken. She is just waiting for reality to catch up. Done. They landed after midnight at a small, isolated forward operating base. The arid air was thick with the smell of dust and diesel. The outpost was manned by only 20 people, all dedicated to logistics and intel gathering. No one approached her. No one even made eye contact. They knew why Mara was there and understood she needed her distance. Samuel stood by the Humvee, a heavy pack of communications and observation gear on his back. He appeared anxious but focused. As they drove away, he informed her that a hiding place was already prepared. It was located on a ridge above the valley, providing perfect concealment and a direct line of sight to the embassy. Mara just nodded, checking her rifle for the third time. Every piece was flawless. The barrel was spotless, the scope true, and the 50 caliber rounds were hand-picked for perfection. The trip lasted 40 minutes on winding roads that cut through abandoned villages. Their headlights sliced through the darkness, revealing crumbling walls and empty windows. This territory was a constant battleground. While government forces controlled the roads, the hills belonged to those who were willing to fight and die for them. They reached the drop-off location just before 2 o'clock in the morning. Mara and Samuels exited the vehicle and began moving over the rocky terrain, making their ascent to the ridge. The night was cold and so quiet it felt oppressive, amplifying the sound of every breath and every footstep. 40 minutes later, they reached the hideout, a natural hollow in the ground concealed by rocks and covered in expert camouflage. From their hidden spot, the valley stretched out below them like a detailed map. Far away, the embassy complex was lit by powerful floodlights and protected by tall walls. Mara expertly pieced together her rifle and settled into her firing stance. Samuels set up the spotting scope, carefully arranging the tripod. The exact distance is 2,820 meters, he reported in a hushed tone. Wind is from the northwest at 8 to 12 knots. Barometric pressure is at 30.1 and dropping. Mara did not respond. She was already scanning the embassy through her scope. She watched for any movement, for any patterns, for the one small detail she needed to complete her mission. The hours passed slowly. The black sky gradually faded to a dark blue, then to a pale gray. The city below started to come to life. The faint noises of traffic, distant voices, and the morning call to prayer floated up from a nearby minaret. Samuels shifted beside her. "How much longer must we wait?" "Until the moment presents itself," Mara replied, her voice barely a whisper. "And if it does not, we keep waiting." Samuels fell silent once more. Mara's breathing slowed and her pulse steadied. She narrowed her entire existence to the small circle of her scope, watching the embassy, its windows, and the shifting patterns of light and shadow. At 6:27 in the morning, she saw it, activity on the third floor, in the northeast corner. A figure stepped into a window, silhouetted by the light from inside. The individual was tall with a powerful build and was holding a small device. It could have been a phone or a radio. Samuels aimed his own scope. That might be him. We need to confirm his identity. Mara increased the magnification on her scope, bringing the image closer. The figure turned, and for a fleeting moment, his face was in perfect view. He wore a dark beard, had a scar running down his left cheek, and his eyes scanned the room with an air of total command. "That is our man," Samuels breathed. "That is Al-Hazm." Mara's heartbeat did not change. She was already calculating for wind, elevation, and the air temperature. The bullet would drop nearly 30 feet and drift to the left over that immense distance. It would lose both velocity and stability. She would only get one chance. Samuels's voice was now sharp and clear. "The wind is steady at 10 knots, the pressure is stable, and the shot is open." Mara exhaled slowly, letting half the air from her lungs and holding what was left. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger, not pulling, just waiting for the perfect instant. Al-Hazam strolled to the window and stared out across the valley. He was speaking to someone out of view, gesturing with his hands, completely at ease and feeling untouchable. He had no idea that death was watching him from 2 miles away. Mara felt the precise moment arrive. It was not a thought, but a deep instinct. The wind paused. The light was perfect. Everything came into alignment. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle answered with a deafening crack. Samuels counted out loud. 3, 4, 5. Mara kept her eye on the scope. The bullet was flying at 2,800 feet per second, yet it seemed to drift in slow motion across the vast space. The entire world seemed to hold its breath. Then, the window pane on the third floor exploded. Al-Hazm's head snapped back violently. His body dropped out of view. Samuels gasped. A hit. That is a confirmed hit. Target down. Mara smoothly cycled the bolt on her rifle, but did not shoot again. She simply continued to watch. Within the embassy, chaos erupted. Figures ran frantically past the windows. The faint sound of shouting drifted across the valley. Their command was dissolving, just as Vance had said it would. Samuels spoke into his radio. Command, this is Overwatch. The target is neutralized. I repeat, the target is neutralized. The quick reaction force is clear to move in. The response was immediate. Overwatch, we have a copy. The quick reaction force is en route. Await further instructions. Mara lowered her rifle and finally released a long, slow breath. It felt as if she had been holding it for an eternity. Her hands were steady and her breathing was calm, but a tight coil of pressure inside her finally began to unwind. Samuels looked at her with awe. That was unbelievable. I have never witnessed a shot like that. Mara did not reply. She was already taking her rifle apart and stowing her gear. She had to be prepared to move, because making the shot was just the beginning. Now came the escape. Their extraction was planned to be quick and quiet. They moved with caution along the ridgeline, retracing their steps. They made their way toward the rendezvous point where the Humvee was waiting. The sun was just peeking over the horizon, painting the valley in soft shades of orange and gold. It was a beautiful view, if you ignored the sounds of combat from the embassy as the rescue team made their entrance. Samuels was in front, using his global positioning system to guide them. Mara followed close behind, her rifle at the ready. She scanned every rock and shadow for any sign of a threat, anything out of place. They were about halfway to the Humvee when Samuels abruptly stopped. "We have company," he whispered, dropping to one knee. Mara crouched beside him, looking where he pointed. 3 figures were about 400 meters away, moving in their direction. They were probably armed locals, drawn by the sound of gunfire. Samuels lifted the radio to his lips to contact his commander. "We have spotted potential hostiles on our escape path, requesting immediate extraction." The radio hissed with static, then a tense voice crackled through. "Negative. Overwatch. Our quick reaction force is engaged with the enemy. All air support is currently occupied. You are on your own for the next 30 minutes. Samuel swore under his breath. Mara watched the armed men move closer. They were still unseen, but it was just a matter of time. The terrain offered very little cover, and the rising sun was quickly chasing away the shadows. "We cannot stay here," she said calmly. "What is the plan?" Mara quickly assessed the situation, calculating angles, distances, and timing. "We move fast. We stay low. If they start shooting, we return fire and find a new position. What if they have backup? Then we will have to adjust," she said. Samuel took a long breath and then gave a firm nod. "You lead the way." They moved in a low, fast crouch, using the scattered rocks and bushes for cover, trying to put space between them and the approaching men. Mara's breathing was steady, her movements precise and controlled. This was not her specialty. A running escape required different skills than long-range shooting, but her training had prepared her. She had been through much worse. From behind them, a shout echoed through the air. The fighters had seen something. Maybe it was their tracks or a flash of movement. Whatever it was, their luck had just run out. Mara and Samuels spotted a shallow, dry riverbed that snaked through the terrain. They slid down into it, using its banks for cover as they hurried toward their pickup point. Suddenly, bullets cracked the air around them. The rounds whizzed past their heads, sending up sprays of dust and rock chips. Samuels flinched but kept running. Mara did not even pause. She was already counting the shots. They came from automatic rifles, fired by 3 men. It was covering fire, designed to trap them, not to hit them. "Keep moving," Mara shouted. They sprinted. The riverbed curved just ahead, offering a moment of safety. Mara risked a glance over her shoulder. The fighters were closer now, maybe 200 meters back, and they were advancing with confidence. It was a mistake. Mara dropped to one knee, brought her rifle up, and aimed in a single, smooth motion. Samuels, seeing that she had stopped, looked back. "What are you doing?" "Get to the vehicle," Mara ordered, her voice unshakable. "Call for an immediate pickup. I will buy you some time. I am not leaving you behind." "That is an order, Lieutenant," she said with authority. Their eyes met for a brief second. Samuels saw something in her gaze. It was not fear or panic, but the calm certainty of someone who had already made peace with the outcome. He hesitated for a heartbeat, and then he ran. Mara refocused on the enemy fighters. 3 of them were now running to close the distance. She settled into a firm firing stance, slowed her breathing, and let her focus narrow to a fine point. This was not a shot from a mile away. It was about the fundamentals: breath control, trigger pull, and follow-through. The first fighter came over the ridge. Mara fired. The massive .50 caliber round hit him square in the chest. The sheer force of the impact threw him backward like he had been hit by a car. He did not get up. The other 2 men instantly dove for cover, yelling and shooting wildly. Mara chambered another round and waited patiently. The seconds stretched into what felt like minutes. Then, one of the men made a run for it, trying to get to a better angle. Mara tracked his movement through her scope, led him by a hair, and fired. He dropped to the ground. The 3rd man did not move. He was smart. He knew he was pinned down. Mara spoke into her radio. "Samuels, report your status. I am at the vehicle. The extraction team is inbound. Their estimated time of arrival is 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Mara knew she could hold on for 10 minutes. She got comfortable, her rifle steady, her eyes scanning for any movement. The last fighter stayed hidden, firing random shots her way, but his aim was off. Time crept by. It took 8 minutes. Then she heard the sound she had been waiting for. It was the quiet whump-whump of helicopter blades, flying in low and fast for the pickup. Mara fired one more shot to keep the enemy's head down, then she got to her feet and ran. She made it to the extraction point in under 2 minutes, her lungs burning and her legs screaming. The escape vehicle was already moving with Samuels at the wheel, racing toward the landing zone. The helicopter touched down in a whirlwind of dust and roaring wind. Mara leaped aboard, and Samuels jumped in right after her. The pilot wasted no time. He pulled the helicopter into the air and banked hard, away from the ridge. Through the open door, Mara watched the valley shrink away, the embassy now a small shape with a column of smoke rising from it. Samuels slumped against the wall, breathing hard. He said, "That was much too close." Mara did not reply. She was already tending to her rifle, running through a mental checklist she followed after every engagement. She inspected her weapon, took account of her ammunition, and confirmed her gear was secure. Everything was in its place. The pilot's voice came through the headset. "This is Griffin 1. Hostages are secure. We have all 16. The mission is a success." That was some incredible shooting. Mara shut her eyes. 16 lives saved because of one single shot. The math was simple, but the weight of it was immense. Samuels looked at her with total disbelief. "How do you do it? How do you stay so calm? I honestly thought we were dead." Mara opened her eyes and gazed out at the passing clouds. "Being afraid does not change the outcome," she said. Training changes the outcome. Discipline changes the outcome. The bullet does not care if you are scared. It only cares if you are ready. Samuels nodded his head slowly, letting her words sink in. The helicopter flew toward their base, leaving the valley far behind them. Inside the loud, vibrating aircraft, Mara sat perfectly still. She was already letting go of the shot, the fear, and the entire mission. Because in 6 hours, she would be back at the Ironcliff base, back in the armory, and back to being nobody special. And that was exactly how she wanted it. The mission debriefing took 3 hours, and by the end, all Mara wanted was silence. They had landed at the forward operating base in the mid-afternoon. Major Vance had pulled her into a tent that smelled of stale coffee and anxiety before the helicopter blades even stopped spinning. Maps were spread across every available surface. Intelligence officers huddled around screens, watching a live feed from the embassy. All the hostages were safe. All 16 had been recovered without a single injury. The enemy leader, Al-Hazam, was confirmed dead. His remaining fighters had scattered into the hills, disorganized and without a leader. It was a perfect victory. But Vance needed to know everything. He wanted every single detail, every calculation, every breath she took before squeezing the trigger. Mara gave him exactly what he needed to hear. She talked about the wind, the air density, and the cold technical details of causing death from 2 miles away. She spoke without emotion or pride, just reciting facts as if she were reading from a technical manual. After it was all over, Vance just leaned back in his chair. He stared at her with a look of pure respect and something much heavier. "Sergeant," he said, his voice low, "most snipers will go their entire careers and never dream of making a shot like that. You made it look routine." Mara remained silent. Vance continued, "The top brass wants to give you a public commendation. They are talking about a medal, maybe something even bigger." No, the word was flat, leaving no room for argument. Vance was taken aback. "Sergeant? With all due respect, sir, no. I was simply doing my job. The hostages are safe. That is the only reward that matters to me." Vance studied her for a long moment, then gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Understood. But I am putting this in your permanent file. When they write the history books, your name will be there, whether you want it to be or not." Mara stood, slinging her rifle case over her shoulder. "History can have its turn, sir. I would just like to go home." 6 hours later, she was on a transport plane heading back to Ironcliff. She got to the base at 4 in the morning, moving through the dark gates like a phantom returning to a familiar haunt. There was no welcome party, no one waiting for her, only the gate guard who glanced at her identification and waved her on through. Mara drove straight to the armory. The building was still and empty, filled only with the quiet hum of the ventilation. She walked to her corner spot, set down her rifle case, and began the familiar ritual she knew by heart. She carefully took her rifle apart, cleaning and inspecting each piece. Her hands knew the routine perfectly, but her mind was far away. 2,800 meters, one shot that saved 16 lives. Those numbers mattered. They always did. But the heaviness of that responsibility never got easier to carry. It was just a weight she had grown used to. As she reassembled the rifle, footsteps echoed in the room. General Hale stood at the door. His uniform was rumpled, and he looked like he hadn't slept for days. "Knox." She glanced up, but remained seated. "Sir." Hale approached slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. "I saw the report just an hour ago. Vance called what you did a miracle." Mara returned her focus to the rifle. "I just did my job." That shot, from 2,800 meters in shifting winds, Vance said his spotters are still trying to figure out your calculations. "It was just math and patience, sir. Same as any other shot." Hale paused beside her, watching her hands work. He also mentioned, "You handled 3 hostiles alone during the extraction." "2, sir." she corrected him quietly. The third one never left cover. 2? Then, Hale repeated, his tone growing serious. This made Mara stop her work. Most soldiers would call that a career highlight. You've been back 4 hours, and you're cleaning your rifle like it's a normal Tuesday. Mara met his gaze directly. Because it was, sir. Training prepares you for the field. The field validates the training. It is a complete circle. You do not celebrate when things go according to plan. Hale was quiet for a moment. He then pulled a stool over and sat down across from her. It was a very unusual move for a general, and it put Mara on high alert. Knox, I have to ask you something, and I need a completely honest answer. Sir, how much longer can you keep this up? The question filled the silent room. Mara's hand froze on the cleaning rod. Keep what up, sir? This, Hale said, gesturing around the armory. Hiding in here, out of sight. Waiting for the one call that makes you the most important person on this base, then disappearing again. How long before it finally gets to you? Mara's expression didn't change, but a faint flicker appeared in her eyes. Respectfully, sir, it will not get to me. This is my purpose. Every person has a limit. Then I have not reached mine yet. Hale leaned forward slightly. I've reviewed your psychological evaluations, including the sealed sections. I had to pull some serious rank to get access. Do you know what they say? Mara stayed silent. They say you possess the most resilient stress response they have ever recorded, that you process trauma differently, that your ability to compartmentalize is almost inhuman. He paused. But they also say that such control always comes with a cost, and that bill always comes due. Mara set the cleaning rod down with slow, deliberate care. General, with all due respect, I appreciate your concern, but I am fine. I have always been fine. And I will continue to be fine as long as I can do my job without being psychoanalyzed every time I get back. Hale studied her for a long moment. He then stood up, nodding slowly. Very well, Sergeant. But if that ever changes, if you need a debrief, or a resource, or just an ear, my door is always open. Understood, sir. Hale began to leave, then paused at the door. One last thing. High Command is considering a new assignment for you. They feel your talents are being underutilized here in the armory. Mara's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Where? A trainer. At the Advanced Sniper Academy. They want you teaching the next generation. For the first time all day, a spark of real frustration ignited inside Mara. I am not a teacher, sir. I know, Hale replied. That is why I refused on your behalf. Mara looked up, genuinely surprised. Hale's expression was unreadable. You are right where you belong, Knox. Not because you are hiding, but because when the call comes, you have to be ready. And you cannot be ready while you're in a classroom, explaining wind charts to recruits who will never face a shot that truly matters. He left before she could respond. Mara sat alone in the quiet armory, the half-built rifle resting in her hands. The weight of his words settled over her. She resumed her work, her movements slow and precise. Her routine was her armor, and it had always kept her safe. 3 days later, a strange energy filled the base. A congressional delegation was on its way. It included senators, defense committee members, and top brass from Washington, D.C. They were coming for a massive capabilities demonstration, complete with air power, ground assaults, and precision shooting. It was a dog and pony show designed to secure next year's budget, and they had a special request to see the sniper who made the impossible shot. Captain Morris delivered the news, looking both nervous and apologetic when he found her in the armory. Sergeant Knox, I'm afraid you have been personally requested for the live-fire demonstration. Mara continued adjusting a rifle scope without looking up. Requested by whom? Senator Carver. He chairs the Armed Services Committee. Apparently, he read the classified after-action report and wants to see America's most lethal sniper in person. Morris looked deeply uncomfortable. His words, not mine. Tell him I decline, Morris said flatly. Morris shifted his weight. I can't do that, Sergeant. The order came down from the Secretary of Defense himself. It's not a request. Mara carefully set down her scope, her movements calm and measured. She looked directly at her captain. I am a soldier, not a showpiece. I do not perform for crowds. He let out a long sigh. I know that, Mara, but this is about more than us. This is about securing the funding for the next generation of our systems. His eyes were pleading. Your demonstration could provide equipment that saves dozens of lives. Mara's expression turned to ice. Or it could turn my life's work into a circus act and devalue everything I stand for. Morris had no answer for that. She stood and picked up her rifle case. Tomorrow, 1400 hours, on the long-distance range. Mara walked past him without a second glance, leaving him alone in the armory, feeling as if he had just betrayed his best soldier. That night, Mara could not sleep. She lay in her bunk, staring into the darkness. She listened to the familiar sounds of the base at night. There were far-off voices, the low rumble of engines, and the chain-link fence rattling in the wind. Her thoughts were racing, running through every possible outcome. She imagined the demonstration, the prying eyes, and the questions about missions she was forbidden to discuss. She hated being put on display, as if her skill was something she could just turn on for entertainment. It was a craft that took her 11 years to master, but she knew how the game was played. Politics fueled the military as much as any weapon, and sometimes a soldier had to be a symbol, whether they wanted to or not. At 500 hours, she abandoned any hope of sleep and went to the range. The entire place was empty and still in the pale morning light. Mara started her ritual, the one process that could quiet her mind. She put her rifle together, checked her ammunition, and calculated the distances. She set up targets at 1,000, 1,500, and 2,000 meters. Then, she got into position and started to shoot. Each shot was a kind of meditation. Breathe in, breathe out, squeeze, and follow through. The rifle's heavy recoil became a familiar, comforting rhythm. She fired until the sun was high in the sky, until her shoulder was sore, and until the steady cadence of her work had erased her worries. When she was finished, every target had a pattern of holes so close together they looked like a single tear. She was ready. She just wished she didn't have to be. The event began precisely at 1400 hours. The observation deck was packed with powerful people. There were senators in sharp suits, generals with chests covered in medals, and defense contractors with hungry eyes. A row of cameras stood ready, and reporters scribbled in their notebooks. A huge screen would provide a live video feed of the targets. Mara walked onto the scene in her gear, rifle case in hand, her face a mask of neutrality. She paid no attention to the stares and whispers. She saw Senator Carver lean toward an aide, and they both shared a smirk. General Hale stood apart from the crowd, his arms folded. Their eyes met briefly. He gave her a small, supportive nod. She nodded back. The range officer approached a microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, today you will witness a live-fire exhibition of superior marksmanship. His voice boomed across the range. Staff Sergeant Mara Knox will engage targets at extreme long range using a Barrett M82A1 rifle. For your safety, please stay behind the yellow line. A ripple of polite applause went through the crowd. Mara went to the firing position, ignoring them all. She set down her case, opened it, and started to assemble her weapon with a calm, practiced efficiency. Suddenly, Senator Carver's voice sliced through the quiet. Sergeant Knox, perhaps you could tell us what makes you so special. Mara didn't bother to look up from her rifle. It comes from training, sir. Experience and discipline. But the senator kept pushing. I have read reports of a confirmed kill you made at almost 3,000 meters. Is there any truth to that? For a brief moment, Mara's hands froze, then she resumed her task. Sir, I am not able to speak about classified missions. A smug, political smile spread across Carver's face. He was certain he had her trapped. I understand. But, just as a thought experiment, could you repeat that kind of shot for us now? A hush fell over the entire viewing area. Mara secured her scope, rose to her feet, and met the senator's gaze. In a hypothetical situation, with the right conditions and a real need, yes. The senator's grin broadened. Excellent. Show us. Mara's expression hardened. Sir. Carver gestured out at the wide desert expanse. The furthest target we have is 2,000 meters, isn't it? Let us add some excitement. Make it twice that. The range officer immediately intervened. Senator, we have nothing placed beyond 2,500 meters. The range is not equipped for such a distance. Carver dismissed his concerns with a flick of his wrist. Then go place something. A vehicle, a drum, it does not matter. I need to know if these stories are real or if this funding is being squandered. Mara could feel the weight of everyone's attention. This was not about her ability. It was about her compliance, about putting on a performance. General Hale's voice broke the thick silence. Senator, what you are asking is not reasonable. The weather conditions are not ideal, the general added, and that area has not been checked for safety. Carver interrupted him, without missing a beat. Thank you for your input, General. However, we came here to witness our soldiers' capabilities. If Sergeant Knox is unable to handle pressure, that is something I must know before we authorize billions in funding. The senator's statement was a clear challenge aimed directly at Mara. She understood she could, and likely should, say no. This was a political show, not an actual operation. Yet, a refusal would cast a shadow on her skills and risk budget cuts that would harm her comrades. Mara turned her gaze to General Hale. The general gave a slight, almost invisible shake of his head, a silent signal to decline. But Mara was already looking past him, across the desert, her mind instantly processing the wind, distance, and angle of the sun. 4,000 meters, she stated, her voice soft but steady. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Carver's grin became even larger. Pardon me, I did not catch that. Mara met his eyes directly. If you really want to see my abilities, Senator, place a target at 4,000 meters, and I will make the shot. The range officer looked as if he might collapse. Sergeant, that's nearly 2.5 miles. A shot like that has never been attempted in a training environment. Mara's tone was composed but firm. I understand the factors involved, Sergeant Major. Prepare the target. I will take care of the shot. Carver's look of amusement shifted to one of intense fascination. Are you really proposing this? Sir, I am always serious about my work. A tense silence held for several seconds before Carver signaled to his assistant. Get it done. The setup took a full 90 minutes. A truck carried an old Humvee to the 4,000-meter mark, positioning it broadside. A 2-foot-wide orange square was painted on its door. The truck then departed, leaving the target to bake in the desert heat. In her scope, the vehicle was a miniature speck. Mara settled onto the platform, her breath even and controlled. The group of dignitaries had fallen completely quiet. Everyone present understood they were on the verge of witnessing something impossible or a colossal failure. Her spotter, Samuels, was beside her. He spoke in a low voice meant only for her. Mara, you can still back out. This is just a game for Carver. You can just get up, she replied softly. It is too late for that. What do you mean? He pressed. If I quit now, they will report that I failed. And later, when another soldier's life is on the line, no one will attempt the impossible shot. They will believe it is not possible. Samuels paused, then adjusted his own scope. Understood. The wind is changing. The wind is coming from the west, between 8 and 15 knots. It is 94 degrees, and the humidity is 12%. The heat shimmer is strong, which will affect your sight. Mara made microscopic changes to her scope's settings. She knew the bullet would fall close to 80 feet and travel for nearly 6 seconds. The planet's spin and the breeze would alter its path. Every calculation had to be flawless. Distance confirmed, 4,012 meters, Samuels reported. Target is not moving. Mara's breathing became deeper, slower. Her pulse found the steady beat she had perfected through countless hours of practice. Her entire focus narrowed to the tiny orange square, a distant speck in her sight. And then she waited. The time stretched on. The special guests started fidgeting. A cough echoed, followed by the click of a camera. Mara tuned it all out. She was looking for that single, perfect instant where all the variables aligned. Any doubt would cause her to miss. 10 minutes went by, then 15. Senator Carver's annoyed voice could be heard. How much more time does she? The rifle's explosive report cut through the air. The force pushed hard against her shoulder as dust billowed from the muzzle. Silence returned. Samuels calmly counted the seconds of flight. 3, 4, 5, 6. The entire audience seemed to be holding its breath. His next word was crisp and certain. Hit. A voice from the target area crackled over the radio. We have a confirmed hit. I say again, the target has been hit. The viewing stand erupted in sound. People gasped and exclaimed. One person began to applaud, and soon everyone was clapping. The large screen displayed the orange square, now with a new, torn hole directly in its middle, where the .50 caliber bullet had pierced the metal door. 4,012 meters. A single shot, perfectly centered. Senator Carver was frozen, his mouth agape, staring at the monitor in utter shock. General Hale's expression was a mixture of pride and concern. Mara remained on the ground, breathing steadily, observing her handiwork through the scope, feeling the deep satisfaction of a difficult task completed perfectly. The shot had no real purpose. The applause meant nothing. The only thing that had changed was that her long-held secret was now out. Her ability was not just skill, it was extraordinary, and everyone knew it. The area descended into chaos. Journalists swarmed her, shouting questions. Military suppliers pulled her commanders aside to talk about business. The senator, who had been skeptical, was now her biggest fan, likely crafting a speech about her talent. Mara ignored the commotion and began to pack up her rifle, concentrating on the routine task of disassembling it. Samuels stood near, his expression one of complete astonishment. He stared at her, speechless. She remained silent. He went on, 4,000 meters, even just for practice. Do you grasp the significance of this? You have just made history. I only had to make a statement, Mara replied quietly. That was the only reason. The only reason? Samuels laughed in disbelief. You! Mara interrupted him, her tone sharp and clear. It was a demonstration with unlimited preparation time. That is a world away from a real mission. Samuels fell silent. Mara closed her rifle case, got up, and slung the strap onto her shoulder. She could feel people watching her, assessing her like a piece of equipment. She hated the feeling. Before she could leave, General Hale approached her. They moved to a secluded area near a storage shed. Hale broke the silence. I cannot decide if that was the bravest thing I have ever seen or the most reckless. Sir, it was necessary. Was it? Or did you allow their taunts to push you into revealing an ability you should have kept hidden? Mara met his gaze. If I had refused, they would have said I was incapable. The Karzon mission would have been dismissed as pure luck. Then, when a true miracle is required, no one will have faith that it is possible. So you painted a target on your own back. I made my ability undeniable. Hale was quiet for a second, then sighed heavily. You know what happens now, do you not? He said. The politicians, the contractors, the news media, they will all want a piece of you. You will be pulled into meetings and media events. You will become a recruitment poster. I will not let that happen. It will not be up to you. Mara's expression became determined. Then I will refuse to follow those orders, and your punishment will be a reassignment or a court-martial, Hale said. Knox, you are now the most valuable marketing tool the military has. They will not let you just disappear. His words landed with the force of a physical blow. Mara looked toward the desert, to the distant target with its perfectly placed hole. Sir, what would you do in my situation? She asked softly. Hale considered her question for a long moment before he replied. I would focus on my original reason for taking the shot. It was not for the crowd. It was for the mission, and for the soldiers who rely on me to achieve the impossible, he added. And I would ensure that purpose is the only one that matters, regardless of what they want from me. Mara nodded slowly. They stood in silence for a bit. As Hale turned to leave, he paused. I just want to say, Knox, that was the most amazing feat I have ever witnessed. And I have witnessed a great deal. Thank you, sir. With that, he left. Mara remained by herself, the heat of the sun on her skin, the sound of the celebration faint in the distance. One shot from 4,000 meters away changed her entire life. Mara grabbed her rifle case and walked toward the barracks. She felt like a ghost moving through the base, completely unseen despite the new attention. Some things do not need to be announced. They only need to be proven, and she had just proven her point. Her new orders arrived at 600 hours the next morning. A military policeman delivered the message, and he looked like he wanted to be anywhere else on Earth. He said, Staff Sergeant Knox, you need to report to General Hale's office immediately. Mara had already been awake for 2 hours, running in the dark to escape the feeling that her life was no longer her own. She had showered and was drinking her second coffee when she heard the knock. She arrived at General Hale's office 7 minutes later. The general was at his desk, but he was not alone. Colonel Greer, the man who had vouched for her weeks ago, was there. Next to the colonel sat a woman Mara did not recognize. She looked to be in her mid-50s and was dressed in civilian clothes. Her sharp eyes seemed to track every single move. General Hale gestured to an empty chair. Please, sit down. Mara sat with her back perfectly straight. She looked from one face to another, feeling the heavy atmosphere in the room. Sergeant Knox, the general began, this is Dr. Ellen Reyes. She is a consultant for the Department of Defense. She advises us on how to use our most valuable assets. Dr. Reyes offered a small smile that felt cold. In simple terms, I find the best place to apply unique skill sets. Mara felt a muscle in her jaw tighten. Ma'am, Dr. Reyes pulled out a tablet and swiped through screens of information. Your work yesterday created a lot of buzz. The video is now classified, but the senators who were present saw enough. They are calling you a strategic weapon. They believe your skill can change the outcome of any conflict. I am a soldier, ma'am, not a weapon. You are both, Dr. Reyes said without emotion. And right now, some very important people are discussing how to best utilize you. Mara looked at General Hale. Sir, if I may speak freely? Please do. I do not wish to be utilized. I simply want to keep doing the job I have always done. Colonel Greer leaned forward to speak. Knox, your job has changed. Like it or not, that shot put you on a very important map. And assets on that map get moved in new ways. Then please take me off the map. That is impossible, Dr. Reyes stated. Too many people saw it. Too many recordings were made. The secret is out now, Sergeant. A cold fear began to spread through Mara's chest. So, what is the plan? General Hale glanced at the colonel before he answered. Command wants to activate you for special assignments on a full-time basis. You will be relieved of your current duties and transferred to a dedicated special operations unit. You will train with our top Tier 1 operators and be deployed on critical missions. Your assignments will be top secret, but your talent will be ready when it is needed most. And what happens if I refuse? The room fell completely silent. Dr. Reyes set her tablet on the desk. In that case, you will be transferred to a teaching role. You will spend the next 5 years instructing new recruits on the fundamentals of marksmanship. Your skills will atrophy. Your relevance will vanish. And when the next impossible shot needs to be made, someone else will take it, and they will fail, all because you decided not to be there. The words landed like heavy blows. Mara kept her breathing even, but her hands clenched into fists in her lap. So you are telling me that I have no choice? You always have a choice, General Hale said gently. But every choice comes with consequences. Your choice now is whether to embrace who you really are or to spend the rest of your career pretending to be someone you are not. Mara looked down at her own hands. They were steady and still. These were the hands that sent a bullet across 2 miles to its target. They were the hands that saved 16 lives in Kherson. They were the hands that cleaned and cared for her rifle every single night. How much time do I have to consider this? She asked. 72 hours, Dr. Reyes answered. After that, the orders will be issued, one way or the other. Mara stood up. Then you will have my answer in 72 hours, ma'am. She gave a sharp salute and walked out of the office before another word could be said. She did not go back to her duties. Instead, Mara found herself walking the perimeter of the base, her mind racing as she weighed her options. As the sun climbed higher, the air grew thick with heat, making the base feel unreal. To accept their offer meant becoming a living weapon. She would be a tool, used and then stored away. It meant a life with no control, no peace, and no sense of normalcy. But to refuse meant becoming useless. It meant watching from the sidelines while her skills could have saved lives. It meant choosing personal comfort over her duty to others. Neither choice felt right. She was still walking when she heard the sound of someone running up behind her. She turned to see Samuels, who was trying to catch his breath. "Mara, wait up!" She stopped and waited for him to reach her. Samuels bent over, hands on his knees, gasping for air. "I heard about your meeting," he said between breaths. "I heard about the choice they are forcing you to make. Word travels fast around here. On a base this size, it always does." He finally stood up straight and looked her in the eyes. "If you care for my opinion, I think you should take it." The special operations position. Mara's expression remained neutral. "Why do you think that?" "Because I have seen what you can do. And I have also seen what happens when truly gifted people decide to walk away from their calling." He paused. "My father was a helicopter pilot in Iraq. He was the best there was, but he got tired of the stress and the fighting. So he put in for a transfer to a training command. He spent the next 8 years of his life teaching young people how to fly, and he was miserable every single day. At night, he would talk about the missions he should have been on. He talked about the soldiers he could have saved if he had only stayed in the fight." Samuels's voice became quiet. "He died 3 years ago from a heart attack, but I'm convinced a part of him had already died from the regret of not doing what he was truly meant to do." Mara was silent for a long moment. Finally, she asked, "What if the thing I am meant to do gets me killed?" "Then you would die for a purpose," he replied, "instead of just fading away in some classroom, talking about a life that you left behind." The power of his words hung in the air between them. Samuels shifted his weight. "Look, I do not know what the right answer is for you, but I know that when you made that shot yesterday, it was not just about skill. It looked like you were fulfilling your destiny. To watch you walk away from that would be like seeing someone put out a fire that the world desperately needs for warmth." Mara looked at him for a long moment, then gave a single, slow nod. "Thank you," Lieutenant. For what? He asked, confused. For telling me the truth. She turned without another word and walked away, leaving Samuel standing alone in the bright sunlight, watching until she was gone. That night, Mara sat alone in her room. She stared at a folder that she had kept in a locked chest for many years. It contained her entire service history. Inside were her enlistment papers, her psychological profiles, and the secret assessments that identified her as the perfect candidate for high-stakes precision missions. She was only 19 when she was first identified during basic training. A drill sergeant had noticed something unique about her. It was not her scores on the shooting range, which were good but not extraordinary. He saw how she performed under extreme pressure, how she grew calm when everyone else was consumed by fear. He saw her ability to calculate angles and distances in her mind during chaotic combat drills. He wrote a detailed report about it. That report made its way to the desk of someone at the Joint Special Operations Command. 3 weeks later, Mara found herself in a room with no windows, speaking with 2 high-ranking officers. They only asked her one thing. How would you feel about doing things that most people believe are impossible? She gave them a simple, honest answer. I am not sure that they are impossible. I only know that I want to try. 6 months after that conversation, she was enrolled in a secret training program that had no official name. She learned the physics of ballistics from scientists. She studied wind and weather with professional storm chasers. She learned to control her own heartbeat from Olympic marksmen. She was acquiring the skills that would one day allow her to do what no one else could. They shaped her, they refined her, and they turned her into a one-of-a-kind instrument of war. And then they ordered her to hide in plain sight. An asset like her was too valuable to risk in conventional warfare. They told her she would only be called when the stakes were at their highest, when the impossible simply had to be done. She accepted this. She even found comfort in the idea of waiting, of being ready, of knowing her purpose without anyone else being aware of it. But the shot she took yesterday had changed all the rules. Now, she had to decide if she ever truly had a choice in her own life, or if that choice had been made for her 11 years ago in that windowless room. Mara placed the folder back in its chest, locked it, and lay down on her bed. Outside her window, the sounds of the busy military base began to quiet for the night. Inside, Mara just stared at the blank ceiling. She wondered if she had ever really been invisible, or if she was simply waiting for someone to finally give her permission to be seen. The next morning, she found General Hale in the dining hall. He was sitting alone with a cup of coffee and a newspaper he was not reading. Mara walked directly to his table and stood at attention until he looked up. "Knox," he said, his voice low. "Have a seat." She sat down, her hands resting on the table. "Sir, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely straight with me." "I am always straight with you," he answered. "When we first met, did you already know who I was? During our talk in the armory, were you aware of my capabilities?" Hale set his coffee mug down. "I sensed something was unique about you, but I did not grasp the full extent until I pulled your file. After your recent actions, I realize you are the most formidable weapon I have ever encountered. That is not a compliment." Mara blinked, surprised. "Sir." He leaned in, his voice low. "Knox, a weapon is just an instrument. It has no mind, no heart. It simply performs its function. Right now, some influential people want to turn you into exactly that. Something they can aim and fire at will. So you think I should turn them down? I think you need to understand the full picture before you agree," he said, pausing. "I have seen what fame does to soldiers. The pressure to be perfect, the endless need to perform, a life that is no longer your own. It destroys many of them. It changes them. Very few emerge from it whole, but some manage it," she pointed out. "Yes, a few do," Hale agreed. "They are the ones who never lose track of why they signed up." Their mission stays clear when everything else gets blurry. Mara was quiet for a moment. Sir, what was your mission when you started? A faint smile touched Hale's lips. To be a leader whose decisions kept his people alive. An officer who understood the human price of every order. He paused for a breath. Eventually, I got very good at what I did, and promotions started coming. Soon, I was in meetings more than I was in the field. My decisions became about politics, not always what was best for my squad. Do you regret it? I live with it every day, Hale admitted quietly. But I also know that the calls I make now, even the political ones, still protect soldiers. It just happens from a distance. He took a sip of his coffee. Knox, whatever path you take, make certain it is your decision, not theirs, and not mine. It has to be yours. You are the one who has to face the consequences. Mara nodded slowly. I understand, sir. She stood to leave. Knox, he said, stopping her. She turned back. For the record, I see much more in you than they do. Please do not ever lose sight of that. 48 hours later, Mara entered General Hale's office to deliver her answer. The general was behind his desk. Colonel Greer sat in the same spot as before. Dr. Reyes was absent, replaced by an official named Harris. He looked like a man who measured the world in spreadsheets. Sergeant Knox, Hale began formally, have you reached a decision? Mara stood at attention, her gaze steady. I have, sir. I will accept the special operations position, but with a few conditions. Harris seemed irritated. Sergeants do not make demands. I am not making demands, Mara responded coolly. I am defining the terms for my optimal performance. A small smile touched Greer's lips. Go on. Mara produced a folded paper from her pocket and set it on the desk. First, I retain final authority on mission engagement. If I judge a shot to be unwise or the risk too great, I can refuse without penalty. Second, absolutely no media, no public appearances, and no political photo ops. My work is done in the shadows, or it is not done at all. Third, my rank and pay grade remain the same. I refuse any advancement tied to publicity or influence. Harris stared at the list as if it were offensive. This is highly irregular. So is a shot from 4,000 meters, Mara countered. You want an exceptional capability, which means you must accept exceptional terms. Hale reviewed the list, his expression unreadable, before looking to Greerness. Colonel, Greer nodded. I can work with this. Mission success is the priority, not public relations. As long as she delivers, High Command will be satisfied. But Harris remained skeptical. What if she rejects an assignment we deem critical? Then you will send someone else, Mara stated simply. You have other assets, other options. But if you assign me, you accept that I am not a simple rifle to be aimed at will. I am a precision instrument, and that requires discretion. Silence filled the room. Then, General Hale picked up a pen and signed the document. It is approved. Greer, get the transfer papers ready. Harris, inform command these terms are non-negotiable. Harris seemed ready to protest, but he held his tongue, gave a sharp nod, and left. Greer stood and extended his hand to Mara. Glad to have you with us, Sergeant. You report to Fort Bragg for integration in 2 weeks. Mara shook his hand. Understood, sir. The door closed behind Greer, leaving Mara alone with the general. The full weight of her choice began to sink in. Hale leaned back in his seat. You know they will push back on this. They will try to grind you down. I am aware. You will need to fight for your ground every day. I know that as well. Hale studied her for a long time. Then why did you say yes? Mara met his gaze without hesitation. Because Lieutenant Samuels was right. Denying my nature does not make me any less of a weapon. It just makes me a useless one. I choose to be dangerous and effective over being safe and invisible. Hale nodded slowly. That is the most honest thing I have heard all week. He rose and came around his desk. For a second, Mara thought he might salute her. Instead, he just extended his hand. Good luck, Knox. Remember who you are. A soldier. Not a weapon, not a symbol, but a soldier. Do not let them convince you otherwise. Mara took his hand, feeling the strength in his grip and the certainty in his eyes. I will not, sir. Her last 2 weeks at Ironcliff were spent closing out her responsibilities. She had to hand over the armory to her successor, a young specialist who looked completely out of his depth. After months of fine-tuning those weapons, Mara walked him through each step with patience to guarantee a perfect handover. She took one final walk along the perimeter, memorizing the feel of the ground. She breathed in the familiar mix of dust and diesel and heard the rhythmic sound of marching feet. In the small space she had called her own for 8 months, she meticulously cleaned her rifle, preparing for whatever came next. On her final evening, General Hale found her there. I suspected this is where you would be, he said, leaning on the door. Mara looked up from the rifle barrel. Some habits die hard, sir. The best ones should not, he replied, entering the room with his hands behind him. I got word from Bragg. Your new unit is top tier. Delta operators, SEAL marksmen, and agency contractors. The best of the best. Good, she said. I would rather work with pros who understand the job than with an audience. A slight smile crossed Hale's face. You will belong there more than you think. After a moment, he pulled a small, weathered leather case from his pocket. He set the dark case on the workbench next to her weapon. What is it? She asked. See for yourself, he replied. Mara opened the clasp. A single medal rested inside, the Distinguished Service Cross. It was old. Its ribbon was worn, and the medal showed its age. It is mine, Hale said quietly. Afghanistan, 2003. I made a choice that saved my men but violated about 6 different protocols. I received this medal and a written warning in the same week. Mara gazed at him, confused. I am not giving this to you for your past actions, Hale explained. It is a reminder. The awards do not matter. The praise does not matter. The only things that count are the lives you protect and the values you live by. All the rest is just background noise. Mara looked at the medal, sensing its real significance. It represented trust, honor, and a shared perspective. Sir, I cannot take this. It is not a request. That is an order, he said, smiling slightly. Anyway, I suspect you will have one of your own before long. This way you will have something for comparison. Mara carefully shut the case and placed it near her rifle. Thank you, sir. Hale nodded once, then straightened up, his tone shifting back to official. Sergeant Knox, it was a privilege. Make them remember you at Bragg. I will, sir. With that, he was gone. Mara sat by herself in the quiet armory, surrounded by her instruments, holding an award she had yet to earn but would never forget. Some skills are not earned from your past actions. They are a promise of the person you are meant to become. The orders were clear. Transportation would arrive at 600 hours. Mara hauled her gear into an unremarkable truck. There was a case for her rifle, a duffel bag, and a footlocker containing her entire world. The driver was a quiet contractor who did not bother with questions or small talk. He was ideal. As the truck passed the main gate, Mara looked back one last time. The Ironcliff base was still in the quiet of dawn. You could see soldiers on their morning run and trucks moving into position. The daily pulse of the base beat on without her. She had been invisible there, shielded and protected by the daily grind. But that part of her life had just ended. This was her chance to leave the shadows, but she would do it on her own terms. She felt the heavy weight of her proven abilities and the duty that came with them. When the truck hit the highway, the base disappeared behind some desert hills. Mara leaned her head back, closed her eyes, and let the feelings come. There was a mix of fear and excitement and the absolute knowledge that everything had just changed. When she looked again, the fear was gone. Only purpose remained. Because Mara Knox was not looking for fame or medals. She was moving toward the one moment when someone would need the impossible. And when that time came, with lives on the line and no room for error, she would be ready. Silent, sharp, and certain, just like she always was. The truck drove on, carrying her toward a future she could not yet imagine but had already accepted. Out there in the distance, a target was waiting. She just was not aware of it yet. Fort Bragg was an assault of humid air and intense energy. The truck left Mara at the front gate just after 1400 hours. The base was massive, spreading out for thousands of acres. It was the headquarters for Special Operations Command, Delta Force, and secret units that were never officially named. The air was a mix of pine scent and gunpowder, and every soldier she saw moved with a powerful focus, knowing a mission could come at any minute. At the processing building, a captain met her. He was young and fit, with eyes that had looked at combat and never backed down. "Staff Sergeant Knox?" "Yes, sir. I am Captain Reeves. I will be handling your integration here. Follow me." They walked across the base without a word, passing training grounds that seemed like elaborate movie sets. There were mock houses for indoor combat, shooting ranges that stretched out of sight, and landing pads with large helicopters waiting to launch. Reeves brought her to a simple building with only a number on it. Inside, the air was 10 degrees colder. It was a secure building with walls that blocked all sound, the kind of place where secrets were discussed every day. He stopped at the door to a conference room. "Your team is inside. They have been told about your abilities. Most of them have their doubts. Make them believers." "I do not have to prove a thing, sir." A slight smile appeared on Reeves's face. "That is the right answer." He opened the door. 6 people looked up at her. 5 were men, and 1 was a woman. They all had the hard look of people shaped by stress and danger. These were elite operators, the best of the best. The man at the far end of the table got up. He was in his mid-40s with a scar on his jaw and sharp, intense eyes. "Sergeant Knox, I am Master Sergeant Torres. This is my unit. Take a seat." Mara sat, putting her rifle case on the floor. Torres gestured around the table. "Meet your team. Hernandez, our specialist in close protection. Kim is our expert on communications and intelligence. Vega is in charge of explosives and breaching. Martinez is the team's combat medic, and that is Collins. She is our tactical coordinator and overwatch." Each person gave a slight nod as he said their name. There were no smiles and no conversation. Torres sat down again. "We have read your file, or at least the parts they did not black out. You have made some unbelievable shots. It is a strong record, but we need to be clear about one thing. This is not a solo performance. You do not shoot without an order. You do not act without the team. Is that understood?" Mara looked him straight in the eye. "I understand, but I will not fire if I am not completely sure I can make the shot. If I think the conditions are wrong, I will tell you." Hernandez, a large man with powerful arms, scoffed. "Are you saying you know better than the mission commander?" "I am saying that I know my own skills, and I will not misrepresent them just to put someone at ease." The room became silent. Collins, the other woman, who was lean with watchful eyes, leaned forward. "Good. The last sniper we had would take any shot he was told to. That led to 2 hostages dying in Yemen because he would not admit the angle was impossible." Torres nodded slowly. "We operate on trust here, Knox. You trust us to get you into position and keep you covered. We have to trust you to tell us what is possible and what is just a dangerous gamble. Can you do that?" "Yes, Sergeant. In that case, welcome to Task Force Wraith. We leave in 3 days. Your training begins immediately. Let us go." The next 72 hours were the hardest of Mara's professional life. She was put into situations that made her past training feel like child's play. They ran drills for rescuing hostages in cities, stopping targets in the middle of a gunfight, and engaging skilled enemy snipers. Every exercise pushed her to her absolute limit and then demanded more, but she never gave up. On day 2, Torres placed her in a simulation. She was on a roof, providing cover for the team as they entered a building 300 meters away. Enemy snipers were in high places, civilians were on the streets, and a key target had to be taken out before the team went in, or they would all be lost. Mara found the enemy sniper in 8 seconds. She planned the shot in 12 seconds and fired at the 18-second mark. The simulator showed a perfect hit. Torres watched the playback later, his arms folded. How did you find him that fast? His shadow was wrong. The shadows from everyone else on that roof matched the sun's position. His was off by 3 degrees. That told me he was using a fake screen for cover. Kim gave a soft whistle. That is impressive. That is very impressive, Vega added. She just beat a computer program. Mara stayed quiet. She was already filing the information away. Fake cover has small tells. She had to remember that. On the 3rd day, they gave her the final challenge. It was a live exercise using real targets. Old cars were set at distances from 800 to 2,400 meters. The wind was choppy, and the clock was ticking. The team advanced through a mock battlefield, while Mara gave them cover from a ridge above. She fired 11 shots in 30 minutes. 10 of them hit their mark. She missed once when a sudden wind gust changed the bullet's path. After it was done, Torres climbed up to where she was, breathing hard from the effort. "That one miss," he said. "Tell me what happened." The wind changed suddenly. A layer of warm air shifted. I did not correct for it in time. What would you do next time? I would have waited 3 more seconds. I would let the wind settle. Then I would fire in that calm moment. Torres nodded. And if those 3 seconds cost the team their lives? Mara looked right at him. Then I would take the shot and live with the chances, but I would always prefer to wait and guarantee the hit. Torres studied her for a long moment. Then he reached out his hand. "You will fit in here, Knox. You will do just fine." She shook his hand, feeling the roughness, the power, and the acceptance in his grip. For the very first time since arriving, she felt like she was finally where she was supposed to be. The call to deploy came faster than anyone thought. Only 18 hours after her final test, the team was on a C-17 military plane flying east. Their destination was secret. Their mission was secret. The only thing Mara knew was that people were in danger, and she and her rifle were needed. The mission briefing was held on the plane. Torres stood near the front of the big cargo area with a tablet in his hand, his face grim. "Our intelligence has found a very important target. His name is Ahmad Kassir. He is the main logistics man for a network that has staged attacks in 3 separate countries. He is located in a compound in the Wakhan corridor. The area is mountainous and isolated. We will have no air support due to political reasons. A direct attack from the ground is impossible. The path to the compound is covered in mines, and the place is heavily guarded." He showed them a satellite picture. Cassier moves between the buildings on a regular routine. At 600 hours local time, he walks from the main house to another building about 40 meters away. It is a 15-second window. That is our only opportunity to take the shot. Mara looked at the image. The distance was 3,100 meters. The height difference was 400 meters. The wind was unpredictable and could reach up to 20 knots. Hernandez just shook his head. "That is completely impossible." "That is the reason Knox is with us," Torres said calmly. He looked directly at Mara. "Can you make that shot?" The shot was a nightmare. A puzzle where every single piece had to be perfect. "I can make it," she promised. "But I need a minimum of 6 hours on site." "You have 8, was the answer. "We go in tonight, Find the spot in total darkness and wait for dawn. The team shared a look, but not a single person argued. Torres set the conditions. We must have a positive identification on Cassier, absolutely no collateral damage, and you have one chance. A miss means he disappears for months, maybe forever. The pressure was so thick you could feel it. Mara gave a sharp nod. I understand. They arrived at midnight, rappelling from a Blackhawk into a strange landscape. It was nothing but jagged peaks and rock fields, with air so thin that every breath was a struggle. The team crept forward in complete silence, communicating with hand signals under night vision. Mara's pack was a heavy burden, containing her rifle, weather gear, computers, and enough ammunition for shots she hoped she would not take. The climb took 4 difficult hours. When they reached the firing position, a rocky ledge above the valley, Cassier's compound looked like an unbreakable fortress. Mara's legs burned and her lungs ached, but her hands were completely steady. Collins secured their perimeter, while Mara began her work. She assembled her rifle with a calm focus, then set up her instruments. One measured the wind, another the temperature, humidity, and air pressure. Her laser rangefinder read the distance at 3,127 meters. The drop in elevation was 412 meters. The wind blew at 14 knots, with powerful gusts hitting 18. It changed direction constantly, without any pattern. Mara calculated the math in her head, then confirmed it on her computer. The bullet would drop almost 90 feet during its flight. The wind would push it in different directions along the way. The travel time would be nearly 7 seconds, which feels like an eternity in this job. Torres crouched beside her. What are you seeing? Difficult, she answered. The valley is creating unpredictable air currents. The wind is not consistent. Can you still do it? Mara paused for 3 long seconds, then nodded. Yes, but I must wait for the wind to die down. If I shoot during a gust, the risk of missing is just too great. How long? As long as it takes, she said quietly. Torres had complete faith in her. We have you covered. Take your time. He moved back, giving her space with her rifle in the pre-dawn light. She settled into position, resting the rifle on its bipod. Her cheek pressed firmly against the stock. Her eye was at the perfect distance from the scope. Her body was aligned directly behind the weapon to absorb the recoil. And then she started to wait. The sky shifted from pitch black to deep purple, then to the soft blue of early morning. The stars faded away. The valley below slowly appeared, like a developing photograph. At 5:45 in the morning, lights began to turn on in the compound. Figures moved between the buildings, beginning their daily routines. At 5:55, a door to the main house swung open. Mara's heartbeat remained slow and even. She had spent the last hour controlling her breathing, staying perfectly calm. Through her scope, she saw a man walk outside. He was tall, with a thick beard, and moved with an arrogance that suggested he felt completely safe. Kim's voice came through the radio in a low whisper. Facial scan is a match. It is Cassier. Mara tracked his every move. He paused to talk to a guard, then began walking toward another building. Her 15-second window was now open. Mara's finger rested lightly on the trigger, not applying pressure, just feeling the connection. For the past 30 minutes, the wind had been a chaotic mess. But in that one single moment, everything became still. The flags hanging on the compound walls went limp. The dust on the ground stopped swirling. Mara released half a breath and held what was left. Her entire focus narrowed to the image in her scope. It was only Cassier's silhouette and the complex calculations she had gone over 100 times. Aim half a body width in front of him, compensate for the drop, and pray the wind holds for 7 seconds. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle's blast shattered the morning silence. The recoil slammed into her shoulder. The sound echoed through the valley like a clap of thunder. 7 seconds. Mara kept her eye on the scope. The bullet traveled along its invisible arc, dropping and drifting, on a direct path to its target. Kassir took one more step. Then his head snapped back. His body crumpled to the ground. Kim's voice crackled through the radio. "We have an impact. Target is down. I repeat, the target is down." The compound immediately erupted into total chaos. Guards ran everywhere, shouting and searching for a shooter they had no hope of finding. Torres spoke into his radio. "It is time to leave. Go, go, go!" The team retreated from the ridge, staying low and moving fast away from their position. As they moved, Mara skillfully broke down her rifle, packing each component away with practiced speed. They reached the pickup point 40 minutes later, their lungs on fire and their muscles screaming. The Black Hawk was already approaching, its blades cutting through the thin mountain atmosphere. They boarded quickly, and the helicopter banked hard, flying away from the peaks and leaving the valley behind them. Inside the chopper, sitting with her team, Mara held her rifle case on her lap. She finally let herself take a long, deep breath. Collins leaned over, shouting above the engine noise. "That was the most incredible thing I have ever seen. 3,000 meters in that wind." Mara remained silent. She just closed her eyes and felt the adrenaline slowly drain away, replaced by the empty, hollow feeling that always followed a successful mission. The math was always straightforward. The waiting was always the most difficult part. The mission debrief took place in a secure facility Mara did not recognize. The command staff was pleased. The operation was clean, effective, and created no political issues. Cassier's elimination would disrupt his entire network for months, if not years. There was no collateral damage, no international blowback, just a perfect result. But Mara hardly heard the praise. She just sat in the room, her thoughts already turning toward the next assignment. There was always another mission, and one more after that. It was an endless cycle of impossible challenges and crushing pressure. Later that day, Torres found her in the armory, methodically cleaning her rifle. "Are you okay?" he asked. Mara looked up from her task. "Yes, Sergeant. You do not look okay." She set down her cleaning rod. "I am just trying to process it." "Process what?" Mara hesitated for a moment before she replied. "This morning, I took a man's life from 3,000 meters away. He had no idea I was coming. He never even knew I existed. He had zero chance to defend himself. And now everyone is acting like I should get an award for it." Torres sat on a stool facing her. "You did win an award. They are putting you in for the Silver Star. I do not want it. It does not matter. You earned it." He paused. "Knox, do you have any clue what Cassier was responsible for?" Mara said nothing. 17 bombings across 3 countries, 43 dead civilians, 12 dead soldiers, and families ruined forever. He planned every one. He funded every one. And he was planning something far worse. Our intelligence confirmed he was targeting a school. Torres leaned forward. "You stopped that with one bullet. It was a single, perfect, impossible shot that saved more lives than we will ever be able to count. So yes, people are treating you like you won a medal, because in every way that matters, you did." Mara looked him straight in the eye. "Does carrying this burden ever get easier?" "No," Torres said with total honesty. "It does not. But your understanding of it gets clearer. You begin to see why it must be done, and that helps you carry the weight." He stood and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Welcome to the Wraiths, Knox. For real this time." He left, and Mara sat there with her rifle, absorbing his words. The weight would never get lighter, but she would keep on carrying it, because somebody had to. 6 months later, Mara stood in General Hale's office at the Pentagon. She was ordered to report in her dress uniform without any further information. She had flown in from Fort Bragg that morning, still tired from a mission in North Africa that ended just 3 days before. Hale was behind a large, gleaming desk that seemed out of place for him. It was too organized, too political. Knox, have a seat. She sat down, her posture perfectly straight. Hale studied her for a moment. You look different. Different how, sir? You seem older. Not your age, but in the burden you carry. Mara did not respond. Hale leaned forward in his chair. I have been reviewing your mission files. 7 missions in 6 months, and 7 successful results. Not a single wasted bullet, not a single civilian casualty. The people upstairs are calling you the single most valuable asset we have. I am just doing my job, sir. Your job is redefining what we thought was possible. He paused. But I did not bring you here to praise you. I called you here because I made you a promise at Ironcliff. I told you to never forget that you are a soldier and not just a tool. I need to know if you still believe that. Mara was quiet for a very long time before she finally answered. I take shots that end lives. I do it from distances that are almost impossible to comprehend. I operate in the dark, a ghost that no one sees or hears. To some, that makes me a weapon. I saw that thought on General Hale's face, but I explained that I am a tool used by people who understand the true price of my work. Torres always clarifies the reason behind every target. Collins always reminds me of the lives that are saved. They make sure I know this is about people, not just numbers. I looked the general right in the eye. So, yes, sir, I am a soldier. A soldier knows that violence is never the goal. It is the very last resort. And every time I act, I honor that difficult truth. General Hale relaxed in his chair, the tension finally leaving his body. Good, he said, his voice now calm. That is very good. He opened a drawer and pulled out a small, simple box. This is for you. But please, wait until you are alone to open it. I took the box, surprised by how heavy it felt. Sir, you have my trust. I stood straight and gave him a sharp salute. Thank you, sir. As I reached the door, he stopped me. You have become everything I hoped for. You do what seems impossible, but you never forget why. Do not ever let anyone take that from you. I will not, sir, I promised, and then I left. That night, in my quiet room at Fort Bragg, I finally opened the box. Inside was a single, old photograph of a young soldier, barely 20 years old. He stood in the desert, his rifle held casually, with a hopeful smile that had not yet met the realities of war. On the back, written in Hale's familiar script, it said, "This was me, before I lost sight of why I started. Do not let this burden make you forget your own reason. R. H." I stared at that picture for a very long time. I placed it on my desk, next to the case that held Hale's own medal for distinguished service. They were 2 anchors in a very rough storm. I knew I was a weapon, that was a fact. But I was a weapon guided by good principles, by good people, and by a purpose bigger than any one task. As long as I remembered that, I knew I could carry the weight. 3 years later, a message I had been both expecting and fearing finally came. The Secretary of Defense himself requested a private meeting. I walked into his office in my formal uniform. The medals I never wanted were pinned perfectly to my chest: a silver star, a bronze star for valor, and 3 Army Commendation medals. Each one represented a single moment, a life taken, and a choice I would carry forever. The secretary, a man with gray hair and the wise eyes of a retired general, stood up as I came in. "Staff Sergeant Knox, thank you for coming." "Sir," I answered. He motioned to a chair, and we both sat down. "I was just looking over your service file," he said. 43 confirmed missions, with 43 successes. You have saved hundreds of lives, maybe thousands. You have become a legend in the special operations community. I remained silent. "But all legends have their limits," the secretary continued. "The body gets tired, and reflexes begin to slow. Your commander mentioned you have been requesting fewer assignments." "That is correct, sir," I said. May I ask for the reason? I looked straight into his eyes. Because I am not a machine, sir. Every mission takes something from you, and I have already given a great deal. I have to be careful with what is left. The secretary nodded his head slowly, with understanding. That is a fair answer. So, I want to offer you a choice. You can remain with your unit, Wraith, but on a lighter schedule, mostly training new soldiers. Or you can retire right now with full honors and benefits. I felt a sudden change deep inside me. Retire, sir? You have served with great honor and have gone far beyond what was asked. No one would ever blame you for stepping down. I was quiet for a long moment. I thought about Ironcliff, about Hale's quiet advice, and the heavy load I had carried for so many years. At last, I spoke. What will happen to the mission if I am gone? Who takes the shots that I would have taken? We will find someone else, he answered. We always do. But will they be successful? The secretary's professional look softened just a little. To be honest, probably not always. You have a special combination of skill, discipline, and excellent judgment. That is not easy to replace. I nodded my head very slowly. Then I will stay. On a lighter schedule, in a training role. But when the truly impossible call comes in, when lives are on the line and I am the only one who can do it, you call me, and I will be there. The secretary smiled. I was hoping that would be your answer. He stood and offered me his hand. Thank you, Sergeant Knox, for your service, for your sacrifice, and for being exactly who this country needed you to be. I shook his hand firmly. I felt the true weight of his words, a kind of recognition I never wanted but was finally learning how to accept. I left the Pentagon that day and flew back to Fort Bragg. I went back to the team that had become my family and to the rifle that had become my voice. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt a sense of quiet that was almost like peace. 5 years after that meeting, Staff Sergeant Mara Knox stood on a training field at Fort Bragg. She was watching a young soldier, not yet 20, try to line up a shot at a target 1,000 meters away. The young man was clearly shaking, feeling nervous, and trying much too hard. Mara walked over and knelt beside him. What is going on in your head? I just cannot make this shot, Sergeant, he said. The wind is not steady. The angle feels completely wrong. Then do not take the shot, she told him simply. The young soldier looked up at her, totally confused. What do you mean? If the shot is not there, you cannot create it. You have to be patient and wait for the perfect moment. You have to trust the process. And if that moment does not come, you accept it and you move to the next plan. But the trainers told us. The trainers are not the ones with their finger on the trigger, she interrupted. You are. And you are the only person who can truly decide when you are ready. Mara paused. So, are you? The soldier looked back at the target and took a deep breath. He got into position again, waited for the wind to calm down, and then he fired. The shot hit the target, right in the center. A huge smile spread across the young man's face. Mara patted him on the shoulder. Excellent. Now do it again and again until it is about skill, not luck. She stepped back and let the young soldier continue to practice. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction that came from teaching someone else, not from making the shot herself. Later that night, she sat in her room, cleaning her rifle for the last time, before putting it away in its case. She was not sent on missions very often anymore. It was only once or twice a year when a special call came in that only she could handle. But she was always ready, because some jobs never really end. Some sense of purpose stays with you forever. And Mara Knox was finally at peace with that truth. The final call for a mission came on a Tuesday. Mara was teaching a class when Torres appeared at the door with a very serious expression. She knew immediately. She dismissed her class, packed her gear, and met Torres in the briefing room. What is the situation? Torres showed satellite images on the screen. A journalist was captured by militants. They are moving her to a location for a public execution. We have a 12-hour window before they broadcast it live. A rescue team is too far away, but we have a visual on their truck. There is one vehicle carrying 6 hostiles and the hostage. They are moving through open desert, which is very flat with almost no cover. Mara studied the image carefully. The distance is 4,200 meters, maybe more, depending on where they stop. The room went completely quiet. 4,200 meters. It was a greater distance than any shot she had ever attempted on a mission. It was farther than any shot anyone had ever attempted. Torres looked directly at her. "Can you do it?" Mara thought of the young soldier she had been training just that morning. She thought of the old photo from Hale that sat on her desk. She thought about every single shot she had ever taken, and every life that was saved as a result. Then she nodded with certainty. "Get me into position. I will do it." They arrived by helicopter at sunrise, landing on a high ridge that overlooked the massive, empty desert. Mara set up her equipment with the calm focus of someone who had done this 100 times before. She checked her sensors, calculated the variables, and prepared for a shot that seemed to break the laws of physics. Collins was next to her, looking through the spotting scope. "The wind is absolutely brutal," he said. "It is blowing up to 25 knots. The temperature is climbing fast. The heat waves are going to make it almost impossible to see the target clearly." "I know, Mara. This is far more extreme than anything we have ever done before." Mara kept her eye on her own scope. "I know that, too." The truck finally came into view 2 hours later. It was a single vehicle moving slowly across the sand, kicking up a long trail of dust. Through her scope, Mara could barely make out the figures inside. 6 men, and 1 woman with her hands tied. "The range is 4,287 meters, Collins confirmed. She did the math in her head. The bullet would drop over 100 feet. It would travel through the air for more than 8 seconds. The bullet would have to fight the wind from 3 different directions as it passed through layers of heat. The margin for error was less than an inch. Collins's voice came through her earpiece. "We have authorization to engage. The shot is yours when you are ready." Mara settled into her position. Her breathing slowed, and her heart rate dropped to the calm, steady beat she had spent 15 years mastering. She was patient. The truck drove for another kilometer before grinding to a halt. The enemy fighters got out, dragging the journalist with them. They were setting up a camera, getting ready for their grim spectacle. Mara centered her scope on the leader, the man with a weapon pressed to the journalist's head. This was it, the impossible shot. The one that would either save a life or haunt her dreams forever. She let out half a breath. Her entire universe narrowed to the crosshairs of her scope. There was only the calculation and the single, perfect moment when everything aligned. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle's report echoed across the valley. 8 seconds of absolute silence followed. Then, the distinct sound of impact. Collins shouted, "Target is down!" "I repeat, the hostile is down." Through her scope, Mara saw the lead militant collapse. The others scrambled in confusion, searching for a threat they could not see. The journalist made a run for it. Within minutes, the rescue team, which had been waiting nearby, moved in and secured her. The mission was a complete success. Mara lowered her rifle. Her hand was perfectly steady, her breathing even. Collins looked at her, his face a mask of pure awe. "I have no words for that." Mara said nothing. She simply began to break down her rifle, pack her equipment, and prepare for the helicopter ride out. The shot was done. The impossible had been achieved once more, and for Mara, that was all that mattered. 6 months after that mission, Mara Knox quietly retired from active service. There was no large ceremony, no farewell speeches. She just traded the uniform she had worn for 16 years for a civilian life that felt strange but wonderfully peaceful. She went back to Montana, to the mountains of her childhood, and to the profound silence she had missed for so long. She bought a small piece of land with a view that stretched on forever. She built a workshop to work on rifles and teach the handful of students who sought her out. Torres and the entire team visited her once. They sat around a fire, drinking coffee and telling stories about missions that would never be made public. "Do you miss it?" Torres finally asked her. Mara gazed at the mountains, at the vast expanse of rock and sky. "Sometimes I do, but I did the job I was made to do, and now I am doing the job I need to do." That new job was living a life free from the endless waiting and the crushing pressure. Torres nodded, understanding completely. They stayed until the sun began to rise, then left her to her thoughts. Mara stood on her porch, watching the sunrise. She felt a kind of peace she had not known in many years. She had been a weapon, a soldier, a legend spoken of in whispers inside secure buildings and classified documents. But she knew she was more than those labels. She was someone who understood that true greatness is not about the recognition you receive. It is about being ready when nobody else is. It is about doing the impossible when lives are hanging in the balance. It was about carrying a weight so that other people would not have to. And now, finally, she was able to set that weight down. Not because she was broken or defeated, but because she had given everything she had at the moment it mattered most. And that was more than enough. Years later, a young soldier appeared at Mara's home. Torres had sent him with a simple message. The impossible was needed just one more time. Mara looked at the soldier and saw her younger self in his eyes, nervous but focused, carrying a burden he did not yet fully understand. She smiled gently. "Please tell Torres that I am retired." "Ma'am," he replied. "He said that you would say that. He also told me to remind you that some callings do not have an end. They just wait for the moment they are needed again." Mara stood there in silence for a very long time. She felt that old, familiar pulse begin to stir within her. The focus, the certainty, the knowledge that someone, somewhere, needed the impossible. She then gave a single nod. "Give me 24 hours to get my gear. I will be there." The soldier saluted and left. And Mara Knox walked into her workshop, opened the case that held her rifle, and began the well-practiced ritual. Because some burdens you carry forever, not because you have to, but because when the world calls on you, you have to answer. Always be mindful of the quiet ones who prepare in the shadows. When a situation calls for the impossible, they are the ones who step out of the darkness. They are the ones who deliver the one thing that everyone else said could never be done.